it's in our morning.
Oh yeah, it's like 6
Like
a.m.
6:30.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Bye, guys.
Good. Yeah, I was just asking about because you know everyone's so woke now. You said, are you based in the Cape?
Yeah,
Western Cape, Eastern Cape,
Western Cape.
Western Cape. Um, yeah, I remember seeing people going to Camps Bay or wherever, and they were like slaughtering.
On the beach. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was like, what? The whole premise behind it is that this is, South Africa. We will do our cultural things where we want. This is our land, etc., etc. And I was just like, it's public land. People don't go and slaughter things on public land like just like anywhere, And worse yet, you have like a privately owned, land that's just next to it, and you know, I mean,
Yeah.
we don't slaughter things just where people are at beaches. We just don't do that. Like,
Yeah.
what do
I
you
mean,
think is happening? Because I've seen that certainly Cape Town seems to have quite a lot of that.
yeah. No, it's a concerted effort. I mean, it's like, well, I mean, when the fascists, before they took over Germany, what they did first is they had to build the confidence in people to break social conventions and to break
Mhm.
prevailing structures and culture, basically. So to radicalize people, it's hard to
Mhm.
radicalize people. You have to acclimatize them to being transgressive, essentially, because
Mm.
this is eventually how you can get people to perform genocide. Essentially, at the end of the day, is sort of how far it goes. But uh, so to normalize this stuff, usually what they do is they I mean, this is a cultural version of that. I think that this is. I mean, it's slightly race baiting probably as well to create a story. It's a good headline. It's a flashpoint of this weird kind of chauvinism that's being sort of facilitated through this morality play.
Mm.
But the 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 biggest problem here, I think, is well, just to finish my point about acclimatizing people to being transgressive, is what the Nazis did was they would round up, they would get people and get them pumped up, get them frenzied, and then they would go and rob a liquor store. They would walk in and walk out. They would have, because if you can do it as a group, then you're somewhat protected by like the mob mentality. So if you can
Mm.
do it together, and that is how you build the confidence essentially. And that has even happened. Like, I live across the way from a little supermarket. I live quite close to an informal settlement and things like that. That we basically
Mm.
share a shopping center, and there
Right.
is a Pick and Pay liquor which is not inside the Pick and Pay but is adjacent, is in one of the other shop premises, and
Mm-hmm.
they had one of these things where they ransacked the place as a group, and I
Right.
have no doubt that that was organized by some. I mean, I don't know if it's the EFF or Black First, Land First, or or whatever
Or
these
something. Yeah.
yeah, some one of these radical black ultra ethno-fascists. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I really think that but and like I said, I mean, this is, I don't know actually. I mean, I haven't. I always talk about Mein Kampf, but I've never read it. But I wonder if there's a chapter in it that I mean, I know some themes in it. Yeah, because I mean, I'm ideologically critical of fascist politics, but I know some of the stuff that Hitler says about useful idiots, which is in the book.
Mm.
So I mean, I kind of talk about that a lot, but I wonder if there's something in that about ransacking liquor stores or something like that as a way to progress. I don't know if it's that much of a manual. I think Che Guevara's book was much more nuts and bolts in terms of how to organize terrorist cells and things like that.
Mm.
But anyway,
I know that would happen with the you know episodes of anti-immigrant sentiment in South Africa. You know how it goes. I'm not big on immigration. However, I'm not going to endorse breaking into the stores of people who are just also trying to make a living and then robbing them of everything they have because hey, they're foreigners. What are they doing in our township, city, country, etc.
it's crazy.
So
I was watching some Daily Friends podcasts, and they talked about some of these attacks, and the foreigners that were attacked weren't even foreign nationals. They were from Swane. Oh no, those people are from like a different province. Like
yeah.
the people that the xenophobic
Oh my
violence.
God.
Yeah, so it's like it's amazing just how the narrative just needs a trigger to sort of to come into effect, or it just needs an excuse to be relied on
Yeah.
as like as an emotional reaction, and it's just a conduit for expressing these feelings which have been, let's say, politically fanned in the simplistic narrative. Because I mean, in some sense, it's like, I mean, you saw this, in the recent stories with the farmers and stuff like that, in Piet Retief. Um,
Mm.
like all that literally, or I mean, so already there's some tension, and then people bring in some political people, ANC people, and then suddenly all these people have got these very fancy printed out messaging, in their protests, like this weird kind of anti-white, weird racialist mumbo jumbo.
Yeah.
But yeah, so
Yeah.
that becomes like because I mean, once the fascist culture and the fascist politics has been normalized, it's like the problem is that you always have to feed that hungry wolf fresh blood and meat. It sort of it
Yeah.
gets thirsty for it, and it just needs an excuse to vent. You need a scapegoat to kind of to allay the because I mean, it's one way, I guess, of not having to doubt your own worldview and commitments, that you are automatically on the right side, and it's always some kind of alien intruder or something like that.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Because for whatever reason, I can't connect to the internet on any other side, but for whatever reason, it's working. The stream's still going. But yeah, I get exactly what you're saying, and it's just it's kind of unreal for me, just how easily South Africans have been whipped up into like you know a lot of this work stuff, and I wonder to what extent that maybe could be linked to the unemployment crisis we have, and
Well, I mean,
yeah.
just to disconnect this slightly from some conditions like that, I mean, I juxtapose this with China, because this is the
Mm.
Chinese political mentality. Like the woke ideology or identitarianism in general is no different from the kind of the ethnic nationalism that China uses to paper over its egregious, kind of corruption and, people farming, as the people in Hong Kong would call it, and it's kind of, it's very ham-handed way of organizing itself, and they have horrible things with the politically connected people at the top. But it's all the kind of corruption that we have in South Africa, really. But that sorry. So my point is that I think that what it really is it's a kind of democratic illiteracy that has become. It is a substitute for democratic literacy. It's simpler, it's easier, it's emotionally gratifying, or you know,
Yeah.
well, it's weird. You know, it's almost like junk. It's literally the junk food of political
Yes.
consciousness, because you know it's nice as you eat it, but it's not satiating, and you need more of it. You know, so you always need to
Yeah.
consume it. So it's
Yeah.
this, you know, and so. And you've got these cheerleaders like Professor Lushaba, the politics professor at UCT, you know, who is essentially an overt racist fascist, you know, all these. And I must say, like, I'm just aghast that there has not been a judicial. If things were working as they should, I think that the proper thing is that when Julius Malema makes the kinds of remarks that he has made, which are overtly hateful and racist, and essentially are an incitement to violence against a whole group of people, and a blanket vilification of a whole group of people, based on claims, literally based on peddling conspiracy theories that there is not an ounce or an iota of evidence for, that these things are fundamentally illegal and unlawful, and he should bear some kind of punishment for the constitutional damages that he is wreaking to the liberal values of the political polity. You know, he's undermining and subverting liberal democracy. And that, I think, has to carry a cost in law. And because essentially the you know, as I say, like in America, you wouldn't necessarily have to worry about the judges fixing this, because everyone is well armed in some sense. You have that hedge against essentially people using their freedom of association from creating a fascistic tyranny against you, is that, well, there's so many guns out there that you can't play those kinds of power games. But in South Africa, if the judiciary is not going to keep the liberal democracy, you know, well, yeah, I mean, we don't have the First Amendment. It is the First Amendment, isn't it?
The second.
Is it the? Excuse me, the second. The
Yeah,
first
the
is
first
free
is free speech.
Oh, excuse me. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. I get what you're saying. I think with, you know, I am quite extreme when it comes to free speech. So to the point where I feel that people should be free to say things that I really find abhorrent, right? However, I don't believe calling for the eradication or systematic oppression of any group in the way that some of these politicians in South Africa have been, you know, saying. I don't think that should be covered by free speech. Um,
Yeah. I mean,
yeah, I think there should
sorry.
be. I think there should be consequences for the sorts of things that have been said. Like I remember watching and waiting for some of these guys, what some of these trials. You know, you wait for these guys to face some sort of consequence, and it won't be seen as hate speech. And I just say, how, how, you know? So I don't know. I don't know how we dig ourselves out of this, because at this point, if I'm not going to move to the States, the very least I can do is move to the Cape before before you guys get independence. You know, because I'm certainly not hopeful about the prospects, you know, of South Africa. And I don't know. How do you feel about that? Do you think, say in 2024, do you think there could be a chance that things could swing for the better? Because heck, even if the ANC loses its stranglehold over the majority of votes, in South Africa, that doesn't necessarily mean we'll be in a better place. Because, they could cozy up to the EFF and then drive us further down the socialism, communism wormhole. So,
there was a podcast which I want to give you the video of from the Daily Friend, where France Cronier, the leader of the current leader of the Institute of Race Relations, literally discusses all
yes,
the.
I've seen, yeah.
Have you seen that one?
No, I haven't seen the video, but I see who you're talking about.
Yeah, so he literally answers this question, and he is hopeful that a new political party will essentially emerge, and a new political party which will basically be sort of centre right,
I hope so.
and that will have a kind of a non-racialist kind of politics, and just basically displace a lot of the stuff in that most South Africans can sort of get behind. I must say, like, I wish I understood the DA more, because I mean, at least I'm very happy with its current leadership, but I don't quite understand its structure. It seems that every time it has a change in leadership, it can essentially radically alter its general outlook. Or I mean, technically that's by the conference. The conferences produce its basically its memorandum of its current viewpoint on things, and so essentially you have to kind of canvas to get that updated if you want anyway. But sorry, I wanted to touch. Sorry, I'm not answering your question directly, but I just wanted to touch on some things that you mentioned. I should have made a note. What were you just saying before asking about South Africa? It was about you were talking about the state of. Just before you started saying that you're either going to move to the States or move to the Western Cape.
Oh, before I said that, I was talking about how I don't see much like I don't have much hope for South Africa, and I think before that I was talking about what I was asking you about 2024 and what you see happening there. You did kind of answer that with the fact that you see a new right wing party emerging. I'm kind of forgetting what exactly I asked you, but I guess because I was talking about the fact that even if you were to have the ANC lose its majority, you could see South Africa slide down further down the socialist wormhole through what you call them politics, these alliances between certain parties, I forget what the coalition politics. And about the just to respond to what you said about the party being centre right, even if that emerges, right, you would have to have a genuine shift in people's opinions that would move in that direction. And morally, philosophically, socially, I can't see South Africans shifting to the right anytime soon. Yeah. Unless that party finds a way of I don't know, somehow getting through to the skulls of people that look, it's better to lower taxes on people. It's better to
That's a very good point that you just raised. And I just want to say that you're weirdly wrong and also correct. So what you just said is right and wrong, because according to the Institute of Race Relations, and I don't think that they fiddle with their statistics, and they fiddle with when they say that the majority of the people in this country are already centre right. That's actually what they believe. But I think they have been trained by the media and trained by these pseudo intellectual elites to be responsive to the racialist dogma, essentially, and the anti-neoliberal bullshit is what you hear on the loudspeaker. But when you talk to people about businesses and small business and medium business, and like in government regulation, and you talk like they are center right on basically everything, especially
I believe
family.
that.
Yeah. So
I actually think that's the case. I think you're spot on with that analysis. Whoever did that, you said it's the Institute of
race relation. Yeah.
Yeah. So if that's the case, I can say that on the ground, certainly in, say, Mpumalanga, Gauteng, KZN, I'm not that familiar with, but those two provinces, I can say that that seems to be the case. People want to have the state get out of their lives. Though you do have people who want to, benefit from the grant system and all of that, but they do feel the infringement on their freedoms. And I think, especially if you start to incorporate the religious side of things, people do lean conservative, but they vote Democrat. It's like South Africa as a whole is a giant replication of what's happening with Black America.
Yeah.
Where, yeah.
Yeah, so like democratic literacy has been displaced by racialized identity mongers, sort of selling people their identity, and you lose your identity if you don't vote for, the...
Yes, yeah, that whole, if you don't vote for me, you're not black thing.
Yeah.
That Joe Biden said, yes, exactly that. And I remember, like I always say this, I remember Jacob Zuma saying, don't listen to the clever blacks, right? Or something along those lines, if I remember correctly. And or he was saying, yeah, those are just the clever blacks or whatever. It's like how there's the term 702 black, referring to the radio station. If you call people clever blacks, if you're talking to other people and you call them clever blacks, like if I'm in the crowd, I'd be asking myself, what do you think of me then? It's like these people are simultaneously apparently pro, black people and trying to look out for black people. But if you pay attention, if you listen in closely enough, you'll see exactly how little they think of the average black person. They sort of have they give off it's almost as though they think they're royalty. They have that vibe to them, for the lack of a better word.
Well, I think that it's like a Führer.
Yeah.
They are the guardian of the identity. They are the leader, and they represent the group or something like that. It's...
Yeah, I also get a sense of condescension because
they speak for the mass.
They speak for the mass, and to call people who don't speak for who don't align with those views clever blacks means that you believe that the mass of black people are not clever, and it's like a Freudian slip of sorts, I think what you'd like to see happen in South Africa, though, just to get back on topic, is to have people finally be aware of the fact that the government is their enemy, not their friend, as it stands, and they should be campaigning hard to get the government as far out of their pocket as possible. I was talking to Good Mother about this a bit earlier about what's currently happening with the TV licenses in South Africa, and I was quoting from the article. Let me see if I have it up. And I saw, oh man, tell me I lost it. I think I may have closed it. But basically, what was happening with that is that no, I don't have it up. What was happening with that is that people found that government's finding that people don't want to pay for their TV licenses, you know, and instead of acknowledging that perhaps the entire thing of state-funded television is failing, and maybe we need to shift to a model maybe that resembles something like, let's say, telecom in the cell phone industry, in the telecommunications industry. They're instead going for more aggressively trying to get hold of those funds. So they're looking to either force MultiChoice to collect the TV licenses on their behalf, or to find another way of levying the tax, which is to me just showing you that the government isn't actually trying to provide a service to you. They're just trying to get to your money. It's like it's a Ponzi scheme, and the SAPC or whatever is the front. It's them pretending to produce an actual service when actually they just want your money. Yeah. So if people don't want the service, if people are voting with their hard-earned rands that they don't want the SAPC, or they're not willing to pay for it, they don't see it as something that's worth getting up and paying for. They'd rather pay for MultiChoice. Then you don't force South Africans to eat, to swallow the costs that SAPC has to go through. You close the business. That's what you do. You don't deny reality. You either adapt or you close the business. But we so ideologically, we're holding on to the idea that these things should be vehicles of, should be strategic assets, etc., etc. They should be like used as a way of trying to be a buffer for unemployment, etc., etc. It's like, but at whose expense? At the expense of people who work in the private industry, who know that on any any day they can be retrenched, due to the fact that I was just saying that the person who works in the private sector actually faces the true brunt of the economy, and they've been forced to maintain the cushy lives of people who work for the public sector, for state-owned entities and all that. It's morally, it's not fair, and it's not right, and I wonder what it will take to have that shift, to have South Africans have that mindset shift that, you know what, I don't have the right to take from the next person based on my need. Because once you have that shift, that's when you actually start to take real steps towards the right. You won't just be doing it as a reaction to, say, a scandal that has come out from the ANC. You'd be actually on a holistic, genuine, philosophical level, shifting towards the right. I don't see that happening anytime soon for South Africa, and I guess that's what my question was, is that for 2024, how do you see that? How do you see things playing out? Do you think South Africans will be genuinely shocked enough by what's happened since the pandemic hit, to shift their votes away from the ANC?
Well, in some sense, I think it's almost not necessarily the perception that the electorate gets of politics is distorted by the mainstream media and stuff like that. And so it really is, how effectively can a political message crack the shell and the insulation that is created by essentially the woke ideology, which, as I say, and I characterize as being fundamentally anti democratic literacy. And I was even going to say that should, in my view, be almost the function of the national South African broadcasting service, is that, for some portion of the day, one of the channels in, we've got 17 official languages, or however many there are, or is it 12?
It's 11.
11.
Yeah.
How, and even perhaps even broader than the official languages, we should have programs that package civic values and civic nationalism and civics education and a general literacy into how government is structured and how it functions, and like how the treasury functions, how the economy functions, in basic terms. Many people they have strange ideas that aren't properly developed about, that, well, where does money come from? People don't understand that, you can't just print money, because then it loses its value. Like that there are, people think that, whenever the government does something, it's because they've just, why don't they just print money and pay us more and pay us the increase that we're asking for? There's this, there's this basic fundamental, mismatch, which in some sense, that's what a quality education, should be there to do. But at least, if you can't put the resources which there should be, one of the reasons why I think that we have such an undeveloped country is because they have, the ANC or the government has cynically kept many large sections of the country undeveloped, so that they could secure a voting bloc of low information voters that could just buy whatever narrative that they were peddling at the time about liberation and about white monopoly capital and all the other bullshit or whatever that helps them continue the charade. That it's not their fault, and don't hold them politically accountable and responsible for the lack of development and transformation, which, as I say, I think is a cynical move in order to secure votes, while at the same time being able to continue to eat from and loot the government and societal resources. But so if we just use the television to say, well, you don't have to live under a chief. Like you could actually vote for a party that part of its platform, would have a different position, that all of that, that everyone's property should essentially be automatically altered. So there is legislation called Ultra, where you can, if you have a plot of tribal land in the tribal system, you can deregister that land as part of the tribal trust, and you can gain private ownership of it, essentially. Which the ANC, there was a drive to try and get to as many people to get title deeds for their property, but the ANC removed that legislation of late. It's crazy. So it's like the ANC is so against people getting land, as if land reform hasn't been paid for twice over, but the money keeps on getting stolen and misappropriated. Like you could have had land reform twice over with the amount of, with how it's been funded. It just never happens. And then instead of taking political responsibility for it, they say, no, the problem is the Constitution has been the obstacle to land reform. So, this, like, passing the buck, pulling the wool over people's eyes, I guess with woke ideology, but also just the lack of a basic education, a basic understanding of how things work. I do think that could somewhat be solved with some basic programming on the national broadcast, on the SABC. But like journalists don't they're not interested in broadcasting, or television journalists on SABC are not making programs like that. Those wouldn't be programs. They would almost be like educational documentaries perhaps as well. I mean, perhaps you could even have basic policy offerings of each of the political parties, like a non-partisan sort of documentary on what's on offer in South African politics, or just generically what different policy options are in terms of, and work out, well, what is the political party that you vote for, what is its position on these basic different, questions.
Issues.
Yeah. And so you could have a drive for democratic literacy, which is exactly a function that a national broadcasting service should be providing. I would say, especially in the context of let's say the people who are still living under chiefs and customary law and things like that. As if there wasn't actually if an electoral decision that could alter the general condition that they live under. Like if you can't blame this is why I hate I shouldn't. This is why I so vehemently disagree with people like Professor Lushaba, who I think is a dirty race-baiting fascist, because he can't even honestly talk about things that he doesn't like. So he doesn't like the tribal system, so he says it was invented by apartheid. Well, who cares, even if that was true? Even if that was true, let's just say that it is true. How can you not blame the ANC for conserving it and continuing it and preserving it?
Mm-hmm.
If you can't make the ANC responsible for that, then like what so there's no black agency in the world or some bullshit like that. It's so he can't even get out of bed and want to progress anything in the life unless he can define it as good versus evil, and and I am part of the identity of goodness, and it's part of this eternal process, and I'm it's this strange morality projection on a kind of cosmological morality that I mean, you can see if you ever watch Professor Lushaba. He's got YouTube videos of his lectures. It is the lowest grade fascistic propaganda that you can imagine. It's kind of it's psychobabble with sort of history conflated and projected onto the present like that. That's the general formula, but anyway, so yeah, breaking the shell. In some sense, how you break the shell is that you just have to ignore it. You just have to, yes, you're going to take some heat. Just water off a duck's back. Like you have a purpose, you have a context, you have, you're doing something that actually stands on itself. It doesn't matter that they're chattering, it's all divisive, woke, democratic illiteracy. It's there to confuse and confuddle and to get you into their conundrum and paradox, which is irreconcilable anyway. They are self-disempowering, self-aggravating, sort of obsessed with failure, but and invested in failure. But let me just say that I did want to talk to you. Sorry, I don't want to fragment this conversation too much, but the thing that you were talking about before, I wrote it down, was free speech, because I do think I do want to have that discussion. I don't want to mix this in now, but I do want to have the discussion about free speech, because I understand that the things that I have said can somewhat sound okay. Well, you're actually wanting to impose certain limits on speech, but I think that there are ways and there are means of doing it. For example, in the political sphere, I'm not saying that people should be jailed for their speech, but I do think that there needs to be some kind of accountability. Well, perhaps jailed for some forms of speech that directly incite violence. The problem with this is that fascist ideology and fascist politics can often be so cryptic, because they can just be like, oh, we're not directly calling for violence, we're just saying that we have received violence and we should be able to defend ourselves, and then they just kind of semantically dress it up.
Technicalities and little loopholes.
And and as I say, the mainstream kind of acquiescence or abeyance, the acceptance of the ideology is probably why a lot of the court things against the EFF have not been able to stick. Because in a kind of ideologically principled way, it is considered a valid political avenue or something like that. They haven't quite developed the jurisprudence well enough, because in our jurisprudence, even one of the constitutional judges himself has essentially already, in his judgments, he has written fascistic bullshit about critical race theory. Essentially, he's reproduced
I was
bullshit.
saying this, scary, but what you just said. I was saying this to the German guy who came in, because he was talking about how in Germany they're actually able to resist. I think he was talking about like feminist policies, because they found that unconstitutional from their side. And I was just saying, I was just shocked at the fact that like a constitution actually doing what it was supposed to do is you don't hear that often when it comes to these sorts of woke issues. Um, and I was just saying, probably what's key is that their judges that side are probably not activists the way perhaps some of ours are.
Yeah.
And
Or they're less politically sort of. I mean,
yeah,
I think a lot of judges have been installed because of their political affiliations, essentially, and allegiances and connections. But sadly, but I'll just say that the yeah. So in some sense, the free speech issue, or I mean, one of the ways that you could do this is that essentially, in some sense, I don't think that even if people do want to, let's say, incite violence, if they do so somewhat privately, I don't think that there's a way to essentially use freedom of speech. I mean, first of all, if they do want to incite violence privately, I mean, that's literally called conspiracy. Like, conspiracy to commit a crime is a crime. Planning to commit a crime, that's what conspiracy is planning. But if you are if you want to privately make a private university teach your fascism there or something like that, but there should be no public state funds that goes towards an organization that fundamentally has values that are anti-constitutional. And in this way, I think that you could very easily say the EFF is one of these organizations. All of their members of parliament should not receive a salary from the state until that status has been until they have rectified that until they seek until they ask the courts to reaffirm that actually they're no longer anti-constitutional or something like that, until they change the offensive position or something like that. But the courts should not be I mean, in some sense, enough of a grey area has, in some sense, I don't think that this is a good excuse for the current laxity within the legal system in being able to cope with this bullshit. I think that they should have been able to see through it. It's just that some people, because one judge at the top, being essentially an identitarian, does not, corrupt all the fundamental structure of how the system is supposed to work. It shouldn't automatically do that. But sorry, what was my point? Is yeah, but anyway, so that's the kind of range of at least punishment for the constitutional damages. Well, that is how I would say that technically I preserve freedom, but you see, you really have to take the intolerance paradox seriously. That if you are tolerant of intolerance, then you're going to get a tyranny, essentially. And in some sense, you could say, well, now you've just created a tyranny of enforcing liberty. And yes, we do actually have to have some boundaries that cannot be crossed. Otherwise, we don't have a marketplace of ideas anymore. Otherwise,
yes.
And we've
That
essentially...
is the role of the state. This is part of its mandate to protect your rights.
Yeah.
And in protecting freedom, there has to be some sort of tyranny or tyrannical force that can be applied against people.
Judges
who
have to use
violate
their
the-
power. That they, in some sense, they have to grow some motivation, some courage to actually fundamentally protect and actually manifest the rights that have been enshrined, and they can't just keep on saying, well, no, this is a political issue or something like that. The Constitution is supreme. I even think that in terms of how the Commission in Parliament has tried to essentially subtract rights from the Constitution, that is illegal. Just because you're a parliamentarian does not mean that you can essentially commit a conspiracy. Technically, Parliament has the power to amend the Constitution. The word is amend. Now, technically, amend can mean alter. But in context, when you're dealing with a supreme law, amendment means then something different. This is my opinion, by the way. I'll just put that here. I think it is the correct opinion, but it is my opinion. The only way you can amend the Constitution is by elaborating it, or by increasing it, or by in addition, in some sense, not by subtraction. You cannot subtract from the supreme law, then it would never be supreme in some sense. In another sense, it's morally indefensible to subtract a right in the Bill of Rights without having 75% vote, because if you are subtracting a right, you are changing the character of the liberal democracy, which means that you have to redefine Section 1, which requires a 75 threshold. Then again, I would say morally you don't have the standing to even do that, because Parliament is not representative enough. If you look at the voter apathy that has increased, which I would generally say is a response to the ANC's cynical cultural hegemony and how it has enforced it, and how they have how they play politics essentially, and how they've operated as essentially a professional syndicate of thieves and ideology disguised by a very thin veneer of ideology that facilitates that thieving and looting and opportunism. But so sorry, what's my point here? My point here is that essentially Parliament has a significant enough democratic deficit that even if they do get the numbers in Parliament, it's not the Constitutional Assembly that first of all, the Constitution is not an act of Parliament. It is also an act of Parliament, but it is not an act of Parliament. It was not promulgated by the Parliament. It was created by the Constitutional Assembly, not by Parliament. So to subtract from that, I would say you need another Constitutional Assembly. Or you need something incredibly radical, but essentially, if you're going to have a parliament that's less representative than the assembly that produced it, I mean, I think that also calls into question the legitimacy of being able to subtract from the Constitution. But anyway, so I'm just saying all these things. I just thought I just wanted to put them on record, because I think this is a decent enough recording that I will perhaps put it on. But anyway. Getting hyped up, but yeah. So I mean, look, the free speech thing is a little bit touchy, but I think that in some sense that's exactly what we need in this atmosphere. We need judges making these kinds of hard distinctions, in some sense, to draw awareness to essentially the importance of democratic literacy in the context of our democracy and values and constitution, but also in some sense letting the government continue to play these political games in some sense, and letting it, for example, scapegoat the constitution even when it should be taking responsibility for its own policy failures. is in some sense allowing especially with the invention of the governmental prerogative, which there is no mention of in the limiting clause in the Bill of Rights. The limitations clause does not say if the government has a prerogative to work out how to do certain things with affirmative action that do weird things to the equality clauses. So there's already been a derogation of the court's responsibility to uphold the Bill of Rights. They've already invented this ideological garbage like a governmental prerogative to paper over not doing their job and essentially allowing government to instead of looking at the mirror, because in some sense they'll say, "Oh, we'll allow you to expand your powers because you've done so bad at governance. Your record of what you have delivered is so bad that we're going to allow you to expand your powers even further and get more prerogative powers because you supposedly need it." Instead of saying no, that's as far as you go. If you can't work within the framework, then like the electorate needs to take a look in the mirror and think about who they're voting for. Essentially, they're giving a new legs and a new ladder to climb towards some next double down sort of solution to their own sort of self generated problem. Anyways, sorry, I guess I'm sort of belaboring the point a bit, but sorry, I was trying to weave in the thread about there's an important theme here which is not often included in this kind of topic, which is, damn, no, I've just lost it, but it's something to do with accountability.
Agency, perhaps?
Sort of think how to, it was when you were talking about something. What was the ideological thing that you chimed in? Because I remember thinking about it while you were talking.
You wanted to mention the free speech question.
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to connect how the laxity of the courts and the structure of the legal framework and the system of principles and values has given extra legs to the let's say the hypothetically viable to the possible viability of bad policy, essentially. That
Right.
Instead of letting the court say no, this policy is destructive, they instead invent a governmental prerogative so that they don't have to do their job of using the limitations clause and saying no, this type of affirmative action is obviously unconstitutional. It obviously contravenes too many rights and it's not worth it because it doesn't even help the poor. It just is basically wholesale corruption. But they won't even allow themselves to ask that question because they just invent the governmental prerogative. So it's basically institutionalized corruption in the law that has been installed into the limitations clause where it's not written. There's nothing written about a governmental prerogative as being one of the ways in which it's justifiable to limit a right in the Bill of Rights. So the judiciary has completely ceded the ground to the government and to the other branches of they have ceded to the legislature to be uncritical of them and in some sense all in the name of critical race theory, because essentially they are
Executing on that.
yeah. Well, well, in some sense, the reason why governmental prerogative was invented was to protect affirmative action and black economic empowerment. So, and basically, they used rationale around how affirmative action is described in the Constitution, which they have misread purposefully. They have purposefully misinterpreted and read it wrong, so that they can essentially circumvent the limitations clause, and that they can also completely reinterpret the equality clauses. So they don't consider, I mean, anyway, equality is a practice in South African law. It's not a, you don't have a right to equality, it's a practice of equality. And in some sense, it's also deeply connected with the limitations clause itself. They have to often be read simultaneously to give them a proper effect in the practice of equality. But yeah, and in some sense, the rights, the closest thing in the equality clauses that are a right at the beginning, where it says equal protection, which is also famously, what's in the American one, what is it? Let me find it. It's worth actually reading, but sorry, this is quite an intellectual rabbit hole, perhaps. But it's maybe worth looking at. Yeah. Okay. This subsection 1 of section 9, equality. Everyone is equal before the law and has the right to equal protection and benefit of the law. Subsection 2, equality includes the full and equal enjoyment of all rights and freedoms to promote the achievement of equality. Legislative and other measures designed to protect or advance persons or categories of persons disadvantaged by unfair discrimination may be taken. 3, the state may not unfairly discriminate directly or indirectly against anyone on one or more of the grounds, including race, gender, sex, pregnancy, marital status, ethnic or social origin, color, sexual orientation, age, disability, religion, conscience, belief, culture, language, and birth. Subsection 4, no person may unfairly discriminate directly or indirectly against anyone on one of the more grounds in terms of subsection 3, national legislation must be enacted to prevent or prohibit unfair discrimination. Discrimination on one or more of the grounds listed in subsection 3 is unfair unless it is established that the discrimination is fair. So the whole question is discrimination fair or not? Because obviously some things you have to discriminate. Like you don't want a female firefighter that doesn't have the same lung capacity as a large male, because she's going to suffocate in a small fire, which is actually what happened in the local fire department around where I live. They gave a woman a post, which quite frankly she shouldn't have been given, but for affirmative action policy, and she died, not even in a large fire. She died because of smoke inhalation. But anyway,
imagine having such an ideological adherence to wokeness and the whole equality thing, that you literally put people's lives in danger. This is how it goes when you let go of logic, rationality, evidence-based decision making, something of that ilk, the scientific method, and instead go for rhetoric, you go for narrative, you go for what is expedient instead of what actually works. It creates that room for all sorts of nonsense to take place, and avoidable problems, really truly avoidable problems. With regards to the makeup of, say, South African let's say the South African approach to the Constitution. I mean, I'm talking boots on the ground. I'm talking the average person. How how do you go about changing the current situation? You know, because most people just it's kind of scary how people are just prepared to let their rights be, you know, given away, to give up their rights to, you know, these guys. Like the fact that this law with regards to the land situation in South Africa is being processed through, it's been put through Parliament with, you know, without any real resistance. How how do you solve that? Because it won't just stop there. It will obviously go further. It won't just be that. Like we've had certain ideas being, you know, peddled. Um, say, for example, the we've got the NHI, which has actually been pushed seriously. We've had the idea of dipping into people's pension funds in order to fund, um, what do they call it? The solidarity. What do they call it? Like a pact. They said we need to have a pact as South Africans, and by pact they mean we need to agree to have the state take more money from you. How do you have South Africans protect themselves from that stuff? I know you spoke about literacy being a problem, which it clearly is. But outside of that, how do we make the means for South Africans to protect themselves from such drastic rights violations of their rights more readily available?
I know that's almost like an impossible question. I think because it's in some sense it's not. I mean, like the states. I mean, you know, imagine asking that to a. I mean, I don't wish to be that hyperbolic, but you know, imagine asking the same question to sort of a Jew in Nazi Germany or something like that. I mean, look, at the end of the day,
Yeah.
like the state always outnumbers you and is more powerful than you. It's just, I guess, you know, I mean, it's interesting. I wonder. I mean, I think secession, you know, the Western Cape, I think, is the most functional node that could potentially try to break away. I don't know if it would succeed or what the reaction would be from the rest of the country. The more dysfunctional the ANC and the rest of the country gets, and maybe it won't have to happen, but maybe that threat needs to be part of the general revivification of the political scene. I mean, you know, I can only sort of imagine different options. Um, so yeah, because at the end of the day, you know, unless you can organize, you know, I guess, you know, one solution would be is if people leaned into kind of, I mean, you don't have an automatic right to bear arms, but you can still get a firearm license and get a firearm. I mean, if enough people are armed and create militias, well-run militias that are organized, then that can also be a hedge against, let's say, irresponsible states. I mean, that's what perhaps some sections of Afrikaner communities have already, you know, that's what they have already sort of invested in. That they are ready to defend their people somewhat collectively, and have organized systems to do that because they kind of already see the writing on the wall, as it were, or at least they can imagine it going that badly. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I thought that, look, ideally, in the next national election, the ANC will lose a majority and they will have to cobble together an alliance. If they cobble together an alliance with the EFF, hopefully it'll be a fractious alliance that blows up and that actually causes the ANC to split because enough of the people in the ANC will not be able to tolerate an alliance with a party like the EFF, because it's interesting. I almost wish the ANC could just evaporate, because I don't think it's salvageable. I don't think it's reformable. Ramaphosa supposedly has to spend so much capital just to make a few wins in the right direction, while essentially, so there's more of an efficient sailing toward. I think you actually disabused me of some of. I think I even expressed to you how confused I was about Ramaphosa, because he seems to to be playing both sides. I think that's how I described it, and I think you just described it as, well, that's actually just a tactic in some sense. And in some sense, I do think that history will see Ramaphosa as essentially a clown, or
some sort of joker. Yeah.
And perhaps quite a moral one, or at least an amoral one at best, that was sort of in it to try to have the prestige of being the person who somewhat kept the brand going, or something like. I'm just trying to think, like, what is he living for? Like what does he want in life? Like, he just wants essentially the ANC to have a little bit of a turnaround in its viability, and to recapitulate its historical capital, political capital, or something like that, under his stewardship. But that I think is such a is such a fundamentally and I can't think of the right word, but it's just it's such a sort of vainglorious project. It's sort of it's certainly not patriotic enough, and it also is fundamentally even very well. It's de facto tolerant of essentially trashing the Constitution in order to supply that desire. So yeah, it's just weak leadership, essentially. But I would just call it a lack of moral substance. But anyway.
Yeah.
But it's weird, because I can also, perhaps I could play devil's advocate that maybe he does really have all the right ideological motivations, but he can't fight woke ideology and the Zuma faction within his party at the same time. So he has to look like a clown while he cleans up some of the people, and then once he cleans up some of the people, then he can focus on policy more, or or something like that. But so he's sort of, maybe he's playing for all the marbles, but that's the kind of that's the that's almost the beyond wishful thinking sort of hope, especially with the kind of toxic rhetoric that comes out of the mouth of him a lot of the time, and Tito Mboweni, which dirty race baiting fascistic rhetoric, and normalizing fascistic politics. So when you see that as becoming the staple of the ANC, you think they're in it to project and promote the sustainability of the ANC brand, and they're not going to be able to do it without essentially race scapegoating.
I think, yeah, it's bad because obviously I would have hoped for some sort of reform um, post Jacob Zuma, and Jacob Zuma had obviously we all know how that went. Uh, I was just shocked by the extent to which the ANC was like deeply socialist, deeply, because I would have thought that after being the Reserve Bank governor, after being um, all this stuff, once he steps into the role of being um, the Minister of Finance, I would have thought Tito Mboweni would be practical, pragmatic in the way he handled things. Realize that look, there's no money. But then when I saw him giving 10 billion to, was it SAA or was it SAPC? I can't remember which of the two got that. And all this other stuff, I was like, oh, he's just another one of the ideologues.
Well, I think
And
he is fighting with his own party, because I think he was fighting against giving money to SAA, but he essentially lost that battle.
yeah,
And then you see him say all these race baiting things. I almost wonder if that is his real position, or if he's almost signaling that he's lost, and therefore this is the only way to kind of, this is the crutch to his failure. If you can kind of see what I'm saying in a strange way. I mean, like, it's weird because I still want to have hope that these people are more, have more integrity than what they are essentially projecting, that in some noble way they are trying to blame it on woke ideology as they do these things that ruin the country. If they do it in the voice of woke ideology, then at least people can associate the poison with the stupidity, as it were, rather than, anyway. Anyway. Perhaps I've got too much of a complicated, sort of wishful thinking that I'm sort of projecting onto the situation, but
yeah, the South Africa really needs some sort of drastic change, and it has to be something deep. It has to be deeper than politics. It has to be on a moral level. And I don't know, you seem way more well informed in terms of the stuff. Do you know of an example of say an African country or a South American country? I think those two continents would be the most relevant to each other because of the stages of development they find themselves at. Do you know of an example of one that had to go through socially that process of transitioning towards transitioning away from socialism and perhaps lay out some of the teething problems that one can expect, you know?
well, we have we have policies, but we actually haven't had socialism. So I don't know socially or culturally if it's quite, we haven't entered the abyss yet. I mean, we've not as if we haven't suffered for this bad policy, but essentially that's all it is crazy bad policy. So we've kind of got the corruption of socialism, but not the full-blown sickness. I mean, it would be a lot worse if we were full-blown socialist. So, I mean, right now we just have anemic growth, but at least we have a relatively function. There are still sectors of the economy that are relatively functional. But I mean, yeah. So yeah, but Chile is a success story, and historically, a lot of that is because of Pinochet, who actually, as the country was reformed, transitioned to kind of a democracy and capitalism, there were these people that wanted to have socialism because socialism has always been big in South America, and there's always, people, and Pinochet took them out. He rounded up the radicals. He took over the government. He had a military dictatorship, but he didn't want to install himself like Gaddafi did. So he did it just to save the democracy, because he didn't want there to be a Marxist coup. And so what he did was he took the radicals and he tortured a lot of them to deprogram them. He frightened them basically just enough so that they would stop being radical. And those that wouldn't essentially get reprogrammed, he killed them. So he was a violent dictator that killed people. And and in some sense, this was kind of like, I would put Pinochet, I always this is why I talk about in America, because both, look, it's different scales, I guess, but I would say both the Senate or congressional committees that were set up in America or the activities against American, the Commission Against Anti-American Activities, or something like that it was called. It was set up to basically be a pseudo-court police. It was almost like a police state to clean out institutions from Marxist capture, essentially, from subversion. And so it's very much the same thing as what America did preemptively or prophylactically or something like that. And what Pinochet had to do actively, and I know Chile is still having the same ideological problem. And in some sense, I think it's because, I do believe that we actually have an intellectual solution, which is the Constitution. But it's not taught in schools. We don't have civics as a module in class. Maybe in history you'll be taught something. But I wonder how much the syllabus has even been correct. I mean, I don't know what it's like to be a school child in the current year.
No,
but
yeah,
I imagine that the teachers are so indoctrinated that they, if it's not in the curriculum, that they pepper it anyway, that they inject it in, I imagine.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I need to go to the bathroom. Can I be right back?
Yeah, sure, no problem.
Sorry, back.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't think there's any particular parallel that because most socialist experiments or states, when they end, it's because everyone knows that it's wrong. I mean, like if you look at all the East Bloc countries, I mean, eventually, it's weird how generationally in South America countries have gone socialist, then they've gone sort of right wing to have free markets, and then they've gone socialist again later. Like when there's a kind of generational memory that's missing.
Yeah.
So it's kind of depressing that you just kind of. I mean, Chile is prone to that even today. Like they keep on thinking that they want a constitution that is going to have like. It seems that some people are pushing to maybe have a bit of like a woke constitution or something like that, which is really a distraction in politics in Chile, I would say. But I mean, Chile is doing incredibly well, and it would be horrible if it sort of all that progress is essentially put under threat because of, I mean, the development in Chile and the standard of life and the quality of life is increased, and then still people just, oh, well, let's maybe create a strange way, because people who think that you can kind of get together and use the government as a tool to implement an across the board mediation that is going to make everything better. It is, in some sense, there's a bit of almost like a slave morality in that sort of concept, that if we can all just get together and agree on something, that something should be, like, if you can all agree on what is unjust, and therefore think that the state has enough of an impetus to sort of do something about it, that you can get somewhere. Whereas if that couldn't have just been arrived at by consensually by private actors, doing things. So it's like, that somehow the magic of compulsion of state power is what is required to sort of, I mean, there is almost a fundamental philosophical democratic conundrum, which is that democracy was not invented in the modern era. Democracy was invented by Athenians and by Aegean people, by Greek people, who had different city-states, and the state that was, they had different forms of democracy and different variants, but I mean, generally it's quite interesting is that leaders in the democracy were not elected. Generally, they were determined by lottery. So you were not there as a personality. You were there as an everyman, and you were there to bring your mind to the job, or that you were appointed as part of some committee or some leadership team or something like that, to apply your mind. And so already the framework is that you're not special. You're there to do a job and to be part of the thinking about it, or the conversation, or something like that. And so you don't already have this hubris kind of installed into you that you've been endorsed by the mass or something like that, because you're just there by lottery. But also, what they had to administer, the state had a free good in some sense, because the state had slaves, and it had enough slaves that they could essentially feed themselves. The state had its own, I mean, it would also have some perhaps taxation or whatever, but the state had a lot of labor through its slaves to provide a public good, which was basically how to use that public good was then decided on by the demos, by the people. So the state actually had something that it could offer the people, and it was just deciding how to administer that. I mean, I'm oversimplifying, because it was also more than that. It was perhaps also policy to some degree in the law itself. But in those days, taxation was so low. Feudalism. To be a serf, was 25% of what you made went to the feudal lord, and that was serfdom. So we're in the current state, we're worse than serfs in terms of tax rates. But Yanis Varoufakis made this point. I'm just echoing it. I just watched him recently on Unheard, with Douglas Murray on the Counterpoint, and it's interesting. I think Yanis Varoufakis actually said something nice about neoliberalism, and I think that might be the difference between, let's say, real, like, blue dog Democrats in the American language, but like real leftists, and like the fake woke leftists, is that they don't complain about neoliberals and neoliberal policy, because neoliberal policy in some sense is not allergic to caring about small and medium businesses, and in some sense people who are against neoliberal policy, it's a good smokescreen to essentially support, sort of the entrenched, unseen sort of plutocrats and vested interests and regulations that entrench and insulate them from competition and such. Anyway, so the state is really problematic because the state has to enslave its citizens through taxation in some sense, and in some sense,
Yes.
progressive taxation is, I think, the biggest also other cause of democratic deficit, or at least it distorts the political picture, because if you cannot make a moral case against rich people and people who are richer and wealthier, then you cannot justify the progressive tax, or at least you cannot justify leaning into it and and overlooking the ineffectual nature of the state, or something like that. So it's like the only, that's what the state has to offer its average citizen, is that it has a progressive tax regime that is going to take more money from richer people, which also means that paradoxically state actors are beholden to higher net worth individuals in terms of creating them and having them in their jurisdiction to tax. So it's in the interests of the state that there is actually more high net worth individuals, because they get taxed at a higher rate. So if you wanted to increase GDP, you would rather increase GDP with fewer people being the beneficiary of more wealth, or something like it. It's weird. Like I believe it creates horrible perverse incentives. If you had a flat tax, then you could actually have a transparent political. Because then essentially, if you had a flat tax, it would be in the government's interest to just raise general economic wealth as broadly as possible. They would be, just to increase the number. Right now they have a perverse incentive that they need more high net worth individuals to feed the progressive tax system. Anyway, so I think that there's a moral hazard just in that basic arithmetic, essentially. But
Yes.
the other point is, okay, so is that you need something to distribute. The state needs something to do, and obviously law and order is one. The courts, is a service that you can't buy and you need. And when I say you can't buy it, I mean it's something that is a natural monopoly. It's something that should be conglomerated. Ideally, you should have one legal system, one system of justice. It doesn't make sense to have a fragmented system of justice. That is something that we should agree on, or we don't agree on it. Then maybe we should be in different polities. We shouldn't be in the same. We shouldn't be connected with one another, because we fundamentally don't trust each other if we don't agree on what justice means, So
Yeah.
So I think that law and order is a natural monopoly, and you essentially can't buy it, so it might as well be provided by the state. In some sense, I think that it wouldn't make sense, perhaps, and this might be a crazy idea, but to completely jettison the judiciary from the rest of government, though, to be funded separately, to have its own way of funding itself independently, and to be like a guild. I was even toying with this idea. This is like to have a cultural guild. The culture guild, with capital letters, with the culture guild or something like that, just so that you could have a way of developing a proto model for a functioning society within a current messy situation, that essentially that you could almost have a system waiting in the wings to fill a power vacuum, so that we don't devolve into, because that's how coups happen, is that governments implode and then you get tin pot dictators and military behind them. But if you have enough of a broad organization with enough sort of political capital or potential political capital sort of charged, waiting, that is in the first place perhaps trying to manifest itself as a political force or a political player, but also, anyway, that is broader though, that has like a broader mandate for its individuals, or you know, that they believe in more things that are perhaps a mixture of morality, which you could say is maybe, you know, like that has certain spiritual connotations or something like that, but it would be more than a state could do. But it's something that obviously is naturally, or should be compatible, I would hope, with a liberal democracy. So anyway, like creating the culture guild and creating perhaps a judiciary that's completely standalone, so that it can't be polluted by political appointments like it has been, and so we don't get institutional corruption that we have gotten. I would like a kind of judicial revolution. I mean, but anyway, that is one of the potential solutions. I have thought, okay, well, I don't like what Pinochet did. I don't think that that's I don't think that that's the principled solution to the problem. It is a de facto practical solution to the problem. Like, I think Chile actually owes Pinochet a debt, even though he didn't have a perfect regime, obviously, and he essentially broke the law. But essentially the law itself and the legal political structure was not sophisticated enough to defend itself against socialism or against Marxist subversion or Marxist Leninism, by the way. All the modern forms of socialism are generally Lenin. I mean, they're all Leninistic. I mean, they're not what I would call orthodox Marxism, as in left Marxists. They're not. They don't believe in liberty. They don't believe in left Marxism, and what I would consider to be orthodox Marxism is that you actually have to be capitalist. You actually have to let capitalism die organically before you try anything else. But no one is willing to do that because they're all Leninists, because they all believe in a preemptive revolution. Anyway.
Right.
And by the way, like I also believe that capitalism may be, you know, like has an expiration date, although I see it evolving essentially into a kind of post-capital thing naturally if it would just be left alone to function, because I think people would naturally, in the same way that you belong to a gym, you might belong to something that grows its own food. And so then instead of buying food every month, you have a membership to something that conserves itself, that sustains itself, and that produces its service, you know, sort of in a sustainable way within its own connected resource chain or whatever. You know, where you design systems where you create processes, industrial processes that target their byproducts. They target their waste to be useful for another process. So you don't make a process based on cost, because you basically design it like a monopoly, but a monopoly that's interconnected with other sister and brother amenities or whatever, and that is how you, I think, scale things up. But you can only do that in a monopolistic model. And I think that privately you can do that. Like, why wouldn't you do that privately? The real problem with is if you have that as your material substrate in a culture, in a society, you actually have to have more integrity in order to perpetuate yourself, because the market, in some sense, forces people to confront the accounting that they're not willing to do. And they would perhaps degenerate and become pathetic and stupid if the market didn't continually remind them that, you know, you can't just kind of go with the flow and you know, take the path of least resistance. You know, like responsibility kind of always goes to the wayside or something like that. It gets lost in the, you know, in the turbulence or something like that. And the market at least keeps on nudging people to correct their their misapprehension of things and their laxity or whatever. And we do live in a complex world as well. So sometimes the thing that should be focused on is not always, you're not always capable of anticipating it. So the market at least has all of that sort of built in, that realism built in, because you can't just plan everything, but you have to be also you have to be responsive in real time, as it were. But yeah, so you have all these. You need a very high functioning, high integrity, not just a high trust society. High trust is worth nothing if there's no integrity backing it up. And until we have the tools of psychology and the tools of self-awareness and things like that, I think that you can't divorce people from the markets. That culturally won't be sustainable, as it were. That you might be able to materially sustain it, but you would devolve very quickly, I think. So yeah, I think that that's the general problem that we face, and why we can't have things like socialism work out. But also, if socialism was even possible, people wouldn't try to conduct it through a revolution. They would just establish it privately, like just get on with it. There's nothing stopping you. Like stop trying to steal it. Build it yourself. Like with the other people that want to build it with you. If you can't even organize that, what makes you think that you're capable of organizing, planning it from the top down? So you have to. It only works if it already works and you get to inherit it, and it falls out of the sky in front of you. It's like. It's a weird kind of mentality. So yeah, I think Leninists generally, or at least in the current incarnation of these Marxist-Leninists, are overtly, going through some sort of arrested development in their mentality, and they're taking it out on the world in general. But yeah, I mean, to me, I see the biggest trouble for transcending the market or creating a society that doesn't use markets anymore is the psychological problem. I think that is the real problem. The status economy or the social standing, like even just because you remove economic classes doesn't mean that you'll remove status. And yeah, I think that people aren't ready for that. Or I think it'll manifest. We'll see things that we saw in history, which was vendetta murders and such like that, and people dueling to the death, and weird kinds of strange blood sports, and I don't know, like just crazy sci-fi stuff. I don't know if you ever watched any of that in the 90s. I think you might be too young for in the 90s. There was this series on the Sci-Fi Channel called The Lex, which had a bit of a cult following, but it was very futuristic, but it was set in another universe, and this evil empire run by this kind of strange figure making this alien spacecraft that grows by eating people that are basically sacrificed to, or parts of people are sacrificed to it, so it can grow and be this big insect spaceship. And these people steal it, but they end up escaping from this empire and running away, and this spaceship can blow up planets, and they just are like misfits, and they just run around looking for a good time in these different planets, and all the different planets that they go to are like, just very strange people that have their own culture, and usually they're very corrupt in some way, and there's some dark secret behind this little community of people, and it's almost like looking into the depravity of human beings, and in some sense I think it modeled spiritual nomadism, which is kind of what we're going through. It was almost a prophetic precursor to everything that we see now, in terms of how people make enclaves of subcultures and how badly they're run and how they're run off of this kind of anyway. Sorry, I'm really going off on tangents here, but you know, I think things have a huge opportunity to devolve. Sorry, I'm really ragging you on your ear here. I imagine we're both very tired. By the way, what do you do that you're awake at 3 a.m.? You said that you worked in the evening.
Right now I'm studying, so I'm studying applied mathematics and statistics. So on the side, I also do a bit of dabbling in the financial market to, just I guess on the practical side of things, because my first degree was in ecos and finance. And so I sort of switched between that and then tuning into a bit of stuff here on YouTube and then studying. So it's the three. Now, what that means is that for most of the stuff, just practically speaking, our time zone's kind of out of whack with a lot of the stuff that's happening in, say, Asia and the United States. So I've just got used to adjusting to that, not working with that side of things. So on top of that, I'm also a bit of a night owl. So that's what I do. That's the reason I'm up at these odd hours. Yeah. But that's my background, and it's just to bring it back to the discussion we're having on whether South Africans are prepared for everything that is to come. Should we take this stuff far enough? I don't even think they're even aware of exactly how bad a lot of the things that are being pushed by our mainstream politicians are, because obviously, as you said, we're not as civically, economically literate, as we need to be. And I think you do touch on something that's true when you say that perhaps it's by design, perhaps it's by plan that we have a nation that isn't as economically literate as it needs to be to vote correctly, to vote in a way that benefits itself. Which is kind of a black pill, it's kind of a doomsday scenario, because it's like that means for everyone who exists today, there's very slim to, if not no hope, with regards to saving South Africa within our lifetime.
Well, I think it is
Not
possible.
I was just gonna say, not without something that's drastic, like something that's like some sort of like revolution level change.
Well, no, I mean, I think expropriation without compensation will cause a famine, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it'll crash. You won't be able to get. There won't be the requisite investments in food production, and also in general, it could tank just the entire economy, which would mean that we won't have imports. And if we can't get imports, that'll slow things down. We might not get the things that we need in order to do certain things. Like everything will it'll be like when Zimbabwe's money exploded. It will have that kind of crisis. And that will either be a wake-up call or it'll be a spark for a genocide. But I mean, I guess it depends how they report on that, or how how the mainstream sort of frames it, but in some sense they might not even need to. You might just need to have political activists going directly shouting, certain slogans that scapegoat the current predicament and divert pressure off the ANC. And then, this is, traditionally in some sense, it is different. I do wonder. It really could go either way, I think. Because in some sense it does matter more what the elites say. In some sense it matters more what Dr. Lushaba thinks than what someone in the Eastern Cape under a tribal chief thinks. So just because and so it's more about winning that argument, because if you can shut up Professor Lushaba and win the argument against him, and get the judiciary to take steps against people who are taking government funds and from public institutions and are being housed by public institutions to spread anti-constitutional propaganda and racialism and essentially hate speech and just generic fascistic mythology and dogma, then that will send the right signals to the mainstream media that report on it, as to it will clue them up, because in some sense this malaise or this just this fog of confusion which allows the mediocrity to perpetuate itself is it's a collective entity. It's not just one faction. It's a system of politics, media, and intellectuals and elites. Let's say that people listen to. It's an ecosystem, and that ecosystem needs to be reformed and discredited. And in some sense, that is more. At the end of the day, people do vote for things, but if the condition of that is in a different light, is sending a different signal, it will allow people on the ground to associate, let's say, in some sense, many people already have the common sense that the government is a bunch of thieves, but somehow that doesn't translate into voting for another political party, or it ends up translating into voting for the EFF, which you just have to think, what the hell, these are the same types of people. These are literally cookie cutter the same types of people. You're just going to choose a different arsehole to give you the same bullshit. Is literally, in some sense, that's not even true, because the EFF is basically just a cutting from the ANC. Anyway, man, I think I this is kind of my bedtime. I must say I slept twice yesterday because I was feeling a bit ill. I don't know if you could tell. I was belching all the time. This is my second day after I broke my fast, and my stomach hasn't exactly settled perfectly. But anyway.
Yeah, man. But this was good. This was very informative. Just a lot of the stuff that you said. I'm not that well read on history, and I think that's also indicative of the curriculum that we have in South Africa when it comes to history. We don't really get into anything with any real depth. But this was very informative, and thanks for hanging out and just dropping some of the knowledge bombs that you drop on a regular basis on your channel. So thanks a lot.
No problem.